Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
Imagine you spend a decade building a life. Not just a house, but a life. You draw the blueprints yourself, carefully selecting the materials, trust, respect, shared ambitions. You believe the foundation is unshakable, the walls are sound, and the person sleeping beside you every night is your partner in the construction of a future you both design. And what if one day, a single, seemingly innocent sentence becomes the demolition charge? The trigger that reveals the entire structure was built on a lie. That is how my life split in two. It wasn't a loud explosion, it was a whisper, a fracture line appearing in the quiet of an ordinary Tuesday evening. In that fraction of a second, the air in the room shifted. Nothing was said, not really, but everything changed. My story, my real story, began its schism. There was before, and there was after. Before, I was Everett Shaw, an architect, a man who lived by the principles of structure, logic, and precision. My world was one of clean lines, calculated stress points, and foundations built to last. I found comfort in order, in predictability. My work demanded it. My nature craved it. My marriage to Genevieve Reed, I believed it was my masterpiece. 10 years. A decade of what I perceived as solid, reliable partnership. She was a brilliant surgeon, a woman of immense skill and dedication. Her life was chaos and adrenaline in the operating room. Mine was quiet contemplation over blueprints and models. We were different, yes, but I thought we complemented each other. Her fire, my earth. Together, we had built a calm harbor from the storms of our respective careers. Our routine was a well-oiled machine, a silent agreement. I knew her schedule, she knew mine. There were no grand emotional outbursts, no sweeping romantic gestures that you see in movies. Ours was a love built on the quiet consistency of daily life. The morning coffee I made for her, the way she'd text me after a long surgery, the shared silence of reading in the same room at night. It was stable, and I valued stability above all else. Or at least, that's what I believed. That Tuesday evening, I came home later than usual. A project review had run long. I walked into our open-plan living space and saw her in the kitchen, her back to me, stirring something on the stove. The scent of garlic and basil filled the air, a scene of domestic tranquility I had witnessed 1,000 times. I often paused in the doorway like that, just watching her, admiring the simple beauty of the moment. But something was off. It wasn't one thing I could name. It was an accumulation of small, discordant details. The rigid set of her shoulders, the way the wooden spoon moved in the pot, slow, mechanical, without thought. Her gaze, fixed on something far beyond the kitchen window. She hadn't heard me come in. I knew my wife. I knew the specific weight of her exhaustion after a 12-hour shift. This wasn't that. This was different. This was hesitation. This was a silence so heavy, it felt like guilt. My stomach tightened, an instinctive, primitive response to a threat I couldn't yet see. I cleared my throat. "Hey," she startled, just slightly. A flicker. When she turned, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everett, you're home." "Long day," I said, moving to set my briefcase down. "Smells good, just pasta," she murmured, turning back to the stove. Avoiding my eyes. And then it came. The sentence dropped into the quiet air between us with the casualness of a comment about the weather. "Reese Dalton is in town." A pause. She didn't look at me. I was thinking of having coffee with him, just to catch up, that was all. No emotion. No preamble. As if she were talking about picking up dry cleaning. I didn't respond right away. The name hung in the air. Reese Dalton. I knew who he was, not because Genevieve spoke of him, but precisely because she didn't. He was the college boyfriend, the great, passionate love before me. The man whose name had been meticulously scrubbed from every story she ever told me about her past. That absence, that was a presence all its own. I kept my composure, it was my default setting, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. A man who, just moments before, believed he knew the woman he had shared a bed with for 10 years, was beginning to doubt if he knew her at all. She finally risked a glance at me over her shoulder. "But if it makes you uncomfortable, that's fine. I don't need to go." The ease with which she offered to back down, that was what bothered me the most. It felt rehearsed. A test. She knew she shouldn't have asked, but she was testing the waters, seeing how far she could go, how asleep at the wheel I truly was. I shook my head, forcing a calm I didn't feel. No. It's okay. You should catch up with an old friend. Her quick surrender, that weightless response, made it painfully clear. This conversation was far from over. It was just beginning. In the days that followed, an unsettling quiet fell over our home. We went through the motions. Dinner was served. The television was turned on. The routine resumed its course. But beneath the surface, a silent transformation was taking place within me. The architect in me, the man who notices every detail, every slight deviation from the blueprint, he was now wide awake. It was as if I had opened an invisible file in my mind. A new project, codenamed Genevieve, and I began to log the data. It started with her phone. Before, at the end of every shift, a simple text would arrive, headed home, or just a heart emoji. It was our signal, our quiet connection. Suddenly, the signals stopped. At first, I made excuses for her. She's overwhelmed. The hospital is understaffed. She's just tired. But my mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, knew that the absence of a signal is a signal in itself. Then came the night that marked the true beginning of the end of my ignorance. She came home late, just after 11. The faint, sweet scent of a perfume I didn't recognize clung to her clothes. It wasn't her usual light, clinical scent. It was a fragrance she would wear for a special occasion, and her makeup, though subtle, was still intact. Too intact for a grueling shift in the ER. Had to cover for Miller, she said, dropping her keys into the bowl by the door. His kid is sick. I just nodded. But my eyes were already scanning. Cataloging. Observation 1. The excuse is plausible but generic. Observation 2. No hospital paperwork in her tote bag. Usually, it's overflowing. Observation 3. She was wearing heels. Sleek, black heels. Not the practical, rubber-soled shoes she always wore at the hospital. She called them her lifesavers. I said nothing. I didn't question her. But I registered every detail, and I began to do it every time she went out, every time an excuse was offered. The invisible file grew thicker. Who did she say she was meeting? What time did she come back? Was her hair tied up, or was it down? Did she laugh when she walked in the door, or was her expression guarded? Was she wearing the same jewelry she left with? Everything was now being mentally logged, an emotional diary where every action was a piece of evidence, every word, a testimony. The signs became more blatant, as if her confidence in my obliviousness was growing. She started leaving her phone face down on the nightstand, a small, deliberate act of concealment she had never performed before. She began going to bed early, claiming exhaustion, only for me to see the soft glow of her laptop from under the bedroom door for hours. Catching up on medical journals, she'd say. Her moods fluctuated wildly. Some days, she was more affectionate than ever, her hands finding mine, her kisses filled with a desperate intensity. On others, she was a ghost in our home. Distant, dry, indifferent to any attempt at conversation. I saw the effort she was making to keep up appearances. But I also saw the truth underneath. She wasn't the same person anymore, and with every lie, with every inconsistency she offered, I felt myself distancing a little more from the naive man I used to be. Until then, I had never doubted her, never once felt the urge to snoop, to question, to pry. But now, I felt like a piece of furniture in my own life, someone she greeted out of politeness, a part of the scenery, but no longer a part of her thoughts, her feelings, her desires. And that, for a man who believed loyalty was the foundation of everything, that hurt more than a confirmed betrayal. It was the slow, agonizing process of being erased, pushed out of my own life without a single word of warning. One Sunday afternoon, she said she was called into the hospital, an emergency consultation. She kissed my cheek, her lips cool. Shouldn't be more than a few hours, she said. I wished her luck and pretended to continue reading an article on sustainable urban design. But inside, I was exploding. Her excuses were becoming repetitive. Her speech had taken on a linear, automatic quality. No variation, no spontaneous detail. As someone who had sat through countless client presentations, I recognized the classic signs of a rehearsed script, of manipulation. Genevieve wasn't just hiding something anymore. She was building a new, parallel reality. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I didn't unravel this performance soon, I would be swallowed by it completely. The moment I decided that observation was no longer enough, something inside me activated. A quiet, determined force. It wasn't impulse. It wasn't blind rage. It was the cold, clear-eyed need of an architect reviewing a compromised structure. It was time to move from theory to fact. For a man like me, who lived by logic and evidence, trusting my instincts was insufficient. Suspicion was a corrosive acid, eating away at my peace. I needed certainty. I needed the truth, laid out like a blueprint, impossible to misinterpret. The next morning, I made a call. Hiring a private investigator felt like something out of a movie, a dramatic step for a man whose life was anything but I approached it with the same detachment I would use to hire a structural engineer. No emotion, just a clear objective. I didn't want a scandal. I didn't want a stalker. I just wanted the facts. With clarity, with proof, and most importantly, I wanted that truth to arrive at the right time, in the right way, with the impact Genevieve deserved to feel. The investigator, a quiet man named Corbin, was efficient and discreet. In less than a week, the email arrived. The subject line was simple: Project Vance. Final report. I sat at my desk in my home office, the house silent around me, and I opened the attached file. Detailed records, timestamps, photographs, everything my heart already knew, now laid bare in the stark, undeniable language of evidence. The information matched the days Genevieve was supposedly on duty, covering shifts, in emergency consultations, but in reality, she had been at shopping malls, at remote, charming cafes I had never been to. And on more than one occasion, she had been seen getting into a sleek, dark sedan, a car belonging to Reese Dalton. The final piece of evidence was a short video clip, grainy, taken from a distance, but perfectly clear. Genevieve and Reese, standing outside a discreet motel on the edge of town. They were hugging, smiling, and then, together, they walked through the door of room 112. There were no more doubts, no more gray areas, no more excuses my mind could try to build. The woman I loved had turned our marriage into a stage, and I was the only one in the audience who still believed in the original script. My first instinct was not to shatter things. It was to plan. It was in that moment of chilling clarity that I decided something. If there was anything worse than being betrayed, it was seeing the betrayer escape without facing the consequences of the world they had broken. My fingers moved across the keyboard. A few searches on social media. A couple of clicks. And there she was. Sloane Dalton. Elegant. Poised. A woman who smiled with her eyes in every picture. The wife of Reese Dalton. I found her professional contact information. She was a curator at a downtown art gallery. I drafted a short, formal email. Dear Mrs. Dalton, my name is Everett Shaw. I apologize for this unsolicited contact, but I believe we have a mutual and sensitive matter to discuss regarding our respective spouses. If you are open to it, I would like to arrange a brief meeting. I hit send. The game was no longer about my pain. It was about exposing the truth. Sloane Dalton replied within the hour. Her response was as concise and professional as my own. Mr. Shaw, I am available to meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. Please find the address attached. She chose a neutral location, a quiet corner of the gallery she curated. When I met her, she was the opposite of what I had imagined. I had expected tears, fragility. Instead, I found a woman with a spine of steel, though her eyes held the unmistakable shadow of a world that had been fractured. I didn't waste time. I laid out the facts calmly, presenting the investigator's report on my tablet, the photos, the timestamps. When she saw the video of them entering the motel, she didn't cry. She took a single, deep breath, closing her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, they were clear and firm. She looked directly at me. They deserve to feel everything they hid from us, she said. Her voice was steady, cold. It was from that shared, chilling resolve that the plan was born. Everything was thought out with surgical precision. An architect and a curator, two professions that demand an eye for detail and presentation, designing one final, devastating exhibit. We chose a discreet but sophisticated restaurant, Celeste, a place where Genevieve and Reese would feel comfortable, but would never expect to be confronted. I booked the table days in advance. I organized the timing. I prepared everything. Sloane, for her part, told Reese she wanted to have a special dinner out, a chance to talk about their relationship, which she admitted to him was already hanging by a thread. He accepted without question, likely relieved at the chance to play the part of the attentive husband. Genevieve was even easier. I invited her for dinner at Celeste to celebrate a fictional work anniversary. Her confidence in her own deception was so absolute that it never crossed her mind that her carefully constructed world was about to be publicly dismantled. She even seemed pleased, as if my invitation was proof that I suspected nothing. When I arrived at the restaurant, Sloane was already there. We had chosen a table in a slightly recessed alcove, offering a clear view of the entrance. We sat opposite each other, two strangers bound by an intimate betrayal. We barely spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was our pact. The plan was simple. We would wait. First, Reese entered. He looked around, distracted, searching for Sloane, and right behind him, just as we had anticipated, Genevieve appeared. She scanned the room with that light, confident smile she always wore when she thought she was in control. But the smile didn't last. Her eyes met Sloane's first, a flicker of confusion, and then she saw me, sitting beside her. Her steps faltered. She froze mid-stride. The color drained from her face. Reese turned, following her gaze, and the mask of confused surprise on his face quickly melted into dawning horror. He understood. In the heavy, ringing silence, Sloane reached down and opened a tablet that had been resting on the seat beside her. She placed it in the center of the table, facing them, and she hit play. The video started. No sound, except for the ambient murmur of the restaurant. Just the two of them, on the screen, laughing as they walked into the motel. There was no shouting, no accusations, no words at all. Just the silent, repeating loop of their betrayal, playing out for them in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Customers at nearby tables began to notice the tense, theatrical stillness of our table. Genevieve was pale, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Reese stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his gaze fixed on the floor. Sloane looked at her husband as if observing a complete stranger. And I kept my gaze steady on Genevieve. I watched her with the calm of a man who no longer needed excuses, because he already knew everything. The power of that moment wasn't in words. It was in the orchestration, the elegance of it. No drama, no scandal, just the precise, unforgiving coldness that only the truth can impose. I didn't get up. I didn't shout. I simply looked at my wife, with the quiet finality of someone closing a chapter. And in that crushing silence, she understood. There was no way to fix this. Everything she thought she could hide, everything she had built in the shadows, had just ended. Right there, in front of the two people who had been most betrayed by her choices. The plan had been executed, and what Genevieve and Reese felt that night was only the first taste of the fall that was yet to come. When we left the restaurant that night, we left as four separate individuals. Reese left first, a quiet, hurried exit, his eyes fixed on the ground as if he had lost his own name. Sloane walked away with her head held high, but the glisten in her eyes under the streetlights revealed the storm she was still weathering. Genevieve stood motionless at the door for a few long seconds, a statue of disbelief. And I left in silence, feeling a kind of relief that was different than I expected. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't triumph. It was a quiet liberation. The feeling of finally setting down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. That same night, the calls began. My phone lit up again and again. Genevieve. I let it ring. Then the voicemail started. Her voice, choked with tears, begging for a chance to talk, to explain. It was a mistake, Everett. A terrible mistake. I was confused. I was lost. But I still love you. I didn't respond. I sat in the dark of my study, staring at the glowing screen on the table, listening to the persistent, desperate sound of her calls, until finally, they stopped. Not because she had given up, but because I knew. Any word from her now, any explanation, would just be another layer of manipulation. I had discovered a strength in myself that she never imagined existed. I was no longer the man who would settle for emotional crumbs. That phase of my life was over. In the days that followed, she tried to see me in person. She showed up at the architectural firm where I worked, waiting in the lobby until security politely asked her to leave. She waited for hours in the parking lot. She left long, rambling letters under the door of our old apartment. But I was already in a different place emotionally. A place she couldn't reach anymore. The connection that once existed between us had been severed, cleanly and publicly, with a silent video that said more than any conversation ever could. And no matter how hard she tried to justify what she had done, none of it erased the cold calculation with which she had deceived, not just me, but the shared history we had built together. While Genevieve emotionally crumbled, I found a strange kind of peace in the silence. I took a leave of absence from work. I spent days alone, reflecting, and I realized that for years, I had been carrying the weight of a marriage that functioned more out of habit than genuine commitment. The betrayal, as cruel as it was, had served as a mirror, a reminder that I had lost myself. I had drifted from friends, abandoned hobbies, forgotten who I was before I became a husband, and now, without that role, I was beginning to relearn how to simply be Everett. Then came her final, desperate gesture. She showed up at the temporary apartment I was renting, unannounced. She looked thin, worn. She came with an unusual proposal. My younger sister, Lena, had been on a kidney transplant list for years, her health a constant, quiet worry for our family. Genevieve stood in my doorway and offered to get tested, to see if she was a match, to donate her kidney. It was a grand, dramatic gesture, an attempt to cleanse her guilt with an extreme act of sacrifice, to prove that there was still love hidden somewhere inside her. But the gesture, as monumental as it seemed, lost all its power in the face of a simple, quiet truth. I looked at her, my expression calm. Lena had her transplant 3 weeks ago, I said, my voice even. A donor match came through. She's recovering well. The look on Genevieve's face was one of pure shock. She didn't even know. She was so disconnected from the reality of my family, our family, that she had missed the most important news. Her attempt wasn't about love. It was a last, desperate act. I saw no anger in her eyes, no irony. Just a deep, profound pity. I turned, walked to my desk, and picked up a rolled-up set of blueprints. I handed them to her. It was the design for a small, modern house on a coastal bluff. It's all here, I said softly. You became a chapter in my life, a lesson in flawed design. I pointed to the blueprints in her hand. And now, I'm moving on to the next project. That was the first time Genevieve truly realized I had left. Not just physically distanced myself. I was gone. Body, soul, everything. And what hurt her most, I think, was knowing that now, I was free. Free of guilt, free of her, free even of the need to hear her apologies. Months after that final conversation, I left everything behind. I sold the apartment we had shared, ended the lease on my temporary space, and moved to a place that had, for a long time, existed only in my imagination and on those blueprints. A small coastal town where no one knew my name, where the past didn't follow me, where memories held less power. I arrived with one suitcase, a notebook, and the firm decision to start over, not as an escape, but as a liberation. Here, I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. I could simply be, without the label of husband, or betrayed, or any of the roles that had once defined me. For the first time in over a decade, I was alone with my own truth. The days began to take on a simple, healing rhythm. Early morning walks along the misty shoreline, watching the waves erase the footprints behind me. Afternoons spent in a local coffee shop, reading and sketching, not for clients, but for myself. I took on a few remote consultations with old colleagues, but only on projects that genuinely excited me. It was work done for pleasure, not necessity. Slowly, I discovered there was a part of me that had never had the chance to exist before. I was relearning how to listen to myself, rediscovering the joy of simple things, the taste of fresh seafood from the local pier, the warmth of the sun on my face, the freedom of living with less. Over time, I made friends. A fisherman named Sam, the woman who ran the local bookstore. I joined community events. I regained a curiosity about people and their stories. And it was during one of those casual conversations, at a town meeting about preserving a historic lighthouse, that I met Cora Wells. She was a literature teacher at the local high school, and she spoke with a fiery passion about the authors she loved. She knew nothing about what I had been through, and that, for me, was essential. She didn't see me as someone broken who needed fixing. She just saw a man, whole, and ready to start over. As I was rebuilding my life from the foundation up, Genevieve's was heading in the opposite direction. The scandal, as quietly as it was executed, had ripples. Her reputation at the hospital was tarnished. She faced an internal review. She lost the prestige she had worked so hard to build. Without friends, without the support of Reese, who had also disappeared from her life, moving across the country with Sloan to try and salvage their own broken marriage, she found herself confronting her own emptiness. She isolated herself. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had sold our home and moved into a small, sterile apartment. She tried to start over, but something within her remained stuck in that moment in the restaurant when she realized she had underestimated the quiet man who had always been by her side. Perhaps that was her true punishment. realizing too late that her biggest mistake wasn't the betrayal itself, but underestimating someone who never raised his voice, but knew exactly when to walk away. One afternoon, sitting at an outdoor cafe in my new town, the sun warm on my back, I received an unexpected text from that same old acquaintance. It was just one line, followed by a photo. Thought you might want to see this. The photo was of Genevieve, sitting alone in a cafe, much like the one I was in. She was thin, her gaze lost in the distance, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. I looked at the image, and instead of stirring something in me, anger, pity, nostalgia, it caused only a strange, profound sense of distance. I felt nothing, as if that woman on the screen had existed in another life, a character in a story I had read a long time ago. At the table in front of me, Cora laughed at a joke I had just made, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The sound was bright, real, and in that moment, I was certain there was no shadow over me anymore. That story, the one full of lies and disappointment, had left marks, yes, but they were like the faint white lines on an old blueprint, a record of a previous design, a structure that had been demolished to make way for something new, something stronger. The marks no longer hurt, they served only as a reminder that sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is being betrayed, because it drives out of your life what no longer deserves to be there. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.